You think black families only packed biscuits and leftover meat for midday meals? Think again. African American ancestors created some of the most resourceful and meaningful lunches in American food history. Let's dig into 30 cheap lunches our black ancestors ate to survive. Syrup sandwiches were among the most iconic survival lunches in African American households, requiring nothing more than bread and thick molasses or sorghum. Families spread dark syrup generously between slices of whatever bread was available, creating a meal that was sweet, filling, and cost almost nothing. The syrup provided quick energy through natural sugars, while bread offered carbohydrates to sustain workers and children through long hours. In rural southern communities, sorghum was often homemade from stalks grown in family gardens, making this lunch essentially free. Children carried these sandwiches to school wrapped in cloth, eating them at midday without shame because everyone understood survival. The sweetness masked what was essentially poverty, transforming scarcity into something children actually look forward to eating. Fatback sandwiches turned the cheapest cut of pork into portable protein that sustained black workers through grueling labor. Thick slices of salted fatback were fried until edges crisped and fat rendered, then placed between bread slices while still warm. The salt and fat content provided essential calories for bodies sweating through fieldwork, factory shifts, or domestic labor. Fatback cost pennies per pound because wealthier families discarded it as waste, not understanding that black cooks could transform it into sustenance. The rendered fat soaked into bread, creating a rich meal that stayed filling for hours. Families bought fatback in bulk, curing it with salt to last weeks without refrigeration. Children learned that this humble cut represented survival, proof that their parents could feed them even when money disappeared. Cold sweet potatoes served as complete lunches, requiring no sandwich making, just a roasted potato carried in a pocket or cloth and eaten by hand. Families roasted sweet potatoes the night before in wood stoves or fireplace coals, letting them cool before packing for labor. Natural sugars provided energy, while fiber kept workers feeling full through long afternoons. Sweet potatoes grew abundantly in southern soil and stored well in root cellars, making them free for families with garden plots. Children ate them during school breaks, peeling back skin and biting into flesh that tasted almost like dessert. The convenience was remarkable because no preparation was needed at lunchtime. For generations of Black Americans, cold sweet potatoes represented the genius of ancestors who understood that simple foods provided reliable nourishment. Sardine sandwiches became a staple lunch for Black workers who needed cheap protein that traveled well without refrigeration. Canned sardines cost only pennies and provided omega-rich fish that families could trust to remain safe in lunch pails through hot afternoons. The sardines were mashed with whatever was available, sometimes mustard, sometimes hot sauce, sometimes just salt, then spread between bread slices. Factory workers and railroad men carried these, knowing they would taste the same at noon as at sunrise. The fish bones were eaten whole, providing calcium that strengthened bodies doing backbreaking works. Sardine cans stacked easily in pantries, requiring no special storage and lasting months. Mothers packed these, knowing their families would receive real nutrition despite limited resources. Potted meat sandwiches provided affordable protein when fresh meat remained far beyond the family budget. These small tins of processed meat paste cost only nickels and could feed multiple children when spread thin across bread. The paste was salty and intensely flavored, meaning a little went far in making plain bread taste substantial. Mothers would open a single tin and divide it among several sandwiches, stretching resources while ensuring everyone ate before school or work. Potted meat required no refrigeration before opening, ideal for pantries without ice boxes. The flavor was not gourmet, but hunger made it taste like provision and care. Children learned to appreciate what their families could provide. Factory workers carried these in metal pails, eating them cold at work sites where no heating was possible. Cornbread, packed alongside jars of potlikker, created a lunch both filling and deeply nourishing. Potlikker, the vitamin-rich broth left after cooking greens with smoked meat, was saved in jars and carried to work sites where it could be sipped or used to soften cornbread. The broth contained iron, vitamins, and essence of whatever pork had flavored the greens, making it nutritionally valuable despite costing nothing. Workers crumbled cornbread into jars and ate the mixture with spoons or drank it directly. This lunch represented the no-waste philosophy of black kitchens where nothing edible was ever discarded. Children sometimes drank potlikker as medicine, understanding it strengthened bodies and warded off illness. The combination traveled well because cornbread stayed fresh for days and sealed jars kept broth safe. Crackling bread served as a complete lunch in itself, combining cornmeal with crispy pork cracklings baked into a dense, satisfying loaf. When families rendered lard from pork fat, the crispy bits left behind were stirred directly into cornbread batter before baking. The result was bread studded with salty, crunchy pork pieces that provided both protein and fat alongside cornmeal's carbohydrates. Workers carried wedges wrapped in cloth, eating them cold at midday when no other food was available. The bread kept well for days, remaining edible, long after fresh bread spoiled. Every crackling represented waste transformed into nutrition, pig fat that wealthier families discarded, becoming essential calories. The flavor was rustic and satisfying, each bite offering different textures as teeth found crackling pieces within cornmeal. Fried fish cakes transformed small catches and leftover fish into portable lunches that traveled well and satisfied hunger. Families near rivers or coastal waters caught small fish, boiled them tender, then mashed the flesh with cornmeal and seasoning before frying into patties. These cakes could be made from fish too small for proper meals, stretching modest catches into food for entire families. The cornmeal binder extended protein, while frying created a crust that protected the interior during transport. Workers carried fish cakes in lunch pails or wrapped in newspaper, eating them cold hours after cooking. Coastal black communities perfected these recipes over generations, understanding that water provided free protein for those willing to fish. The cakes represented skill and survival, transforming minimal resources into real meals. Onion sandwiches were poverty meals requiring nothing more than bread, raw onion slices, and whatever fat was available for spreading. Families sliced onions thick, layered them between bread, spread with lard or bacon drippings, and packed them for lunches when nothing else was available. The onions provided nutrition and sharp flavor that made plain bread more interesting than eating it dry. During the Depression and other lean periods, onion sandwiches kept families fed when even pennies for other ingredients had disappeared. Children ate them without complaint because hunger taught appreciation for whatever appeared. The strong flavor meant that even thin onion slices could make bread taste like something rather than nothing. Adults understood these sandwiches represented temporary hardship rather than permanent condition. Cold grits cakes provided portable lunches made from leftover breakfast grits that would otherwise go to waste. Families poured leftover grits into pans to set overnight, then sliced the firm mixture into squares and fried them golden the next morning. These cakes could be eaten hot for breakfast or packed cold for midday meals, their dense texture holding up through hours in lunch pails. The process transformed cheap cornmeal into something more substantial than porridge. Workers carried grits cakes knowing they would fill hungry stomachs when no other food was available. Some families added bacon or cheese when affordable, but plain grits cakes provided satisfying carbohydrates without additions. The technique represented kitchen wisdom passed between generations of Black women who understood creativity conquered poverty. Peanut butter and molasses sandwiches combined two cheap pantry staples into a lunch that was both sweet and filling. Families spread peanut butter on one slice of bread and drizzled thick molasses on the other, pressing them together into a sticky, satisfying meal. The peanut butter provided protein and fat that sustained energy through afternoon labor, while molasses added iron and quick sugars. Both ingredients cost pennies and lasted weeks without refrigeration, making this combination reliable during lean times. Children loved the sweetness, often requesting these even when other options were available. The molasses cut through the peanut butter's thickness, creating a flavor that felt like dessert rather than poverty. Workers carried these, knowing the protein would sustain them through physical labor. Bean sandwiches turned leftover pinto or navy beans into portable lunches that provided complete protein. Families mashed cooked beans with a fork, seasoned them with salt, pepper, and whatever hot sauce was available, then spread them between bread slices. The beans had often been cooked with ham hocks or fatback, carrying those flavors into the sandwich. This lunch cost almost nothing because dried beans were among the cheapest foods available, and leftovers stretched Sunday dinner into Monday lunch. Children carried these to school while adults took them to factories and fields. The texture was soft and filling, each bite delivering the earthy richness of slow-cooked beans. Bean sandwiches represented the practical genius of Black kitchens where nothing was ever discarded. Pickle sandwiches provided tangy lunches when refrigerators held little else beyond jars of home-canned vegetables. Families sliced pickles lengthwise and layered them between bread spread with whatever fat was available. The pickles offered crunch, acidity, and flavor that made plain bread interesting. During summer, when gardens overproduced cucumbers, families canned dozens of jars, ensuring pickle availability through winter. The vinegar brine provided some nutritional value, while cucumbers offered modest vitamins. Children ate these without complaint because the tangy crunch satisfied in ways plain bread alone never could. The sandwiches traveled well since pickles didn't spoil, and bread stayed fresher when moisture from the pickles kept it soft. This lunch represented families who preserved summer abundance for winter scarcity. Tomato sandwiches celebrated summer's abundance when gardens produced more ripe tomatoes than families could eat fresh. Thick slices of red tomato were layered between bread, spread with mayonnaise, and sprinkled with salt and pepper. The juice soaked into bread, creating a messy but deeply satisfying lunch that tasted like summer itself. Families ate these constantly during tomato season, knowing fresh abundance would disappear with the first frost. The simplicity was the point because perfectly ripe tomatoes needed nothing more than bread and salt to become memorable. Children helped pick tomatoes and learned to appreciate how gardens could feed families. These sandwiches couldn't travel far because juice made bread soggy, but eaten fresh, they represented everything good about growing your own food. Souse meat sandwiches used the jellied pork that resulted from boiling pig feet, ears, and other scraps with vinegar and spices. The meat was picked from bones, mixed with natural gelatin, and pressed into loaves that could be sliced for sandwiches. The flavor was tangy and rich, the texture somewhere between firm and soft. Families made sauce after hog killings, preserving parts that would otherwise go to waste. The vinegar acted as preservative, allowing the meat to last for weeks in cool cellars or ice boxes. Workers carried sauce sandwiches, knowing the protein would sustain them through demanding labor. The taste was distinctive, not for everyone, but deeply satisfying for those who grew up eating it. Sauce represented the nose-to-tail philosophy that defined Black foodways. Cold biscuits with preserves provided sweet lunches made from breakfast leftovers and home-canned fruit. Families baked biscuits in the morning, setting aside extras for midday meals. These were split and spread with whatever preserves the pantry held, often blackberry, peach, or fig jam made from fruit gathered in season. The biscuits were denser cold than fresh, but preserves added moisture and sweetness that made them satisfying. Children carried these, wrapped in cloth, eating them at school while dreaming of summer days spent picking berries. The preserves represented hours of labor, harvesting and canning fruit that would otherwise rot. Together, biscuit and jam cost almost nothing, but delivered comfort that felt like abundance. This lunch connected daily sustenance to seasonal rhythms. Poke salad sandwiches used foraged greens that grew wild across the South, providing free nutrition for families who knew how to prepare them safely. Young pokeweed shoots were gathered in spring, boiled multiple times to remove toxins, then seasoned and packed between bread. The greens had an earthy, slightly bitter flavor that paired well with bacon drippings or hot sauce. Foraging poke required knowledge passed between generations, understanding which plants were safe and when to harvest them. Families gathered poke from roadsides and field edges where it grew abundantly. The practice connected eating to the land in ways that purchased food never could. Children learned identification skills alongside cooking techniques. Poke sandwiches represented self-reliance and understanding that survival meant knowing what grew free. Streak O-Lean sandwiches featured cheap salt pork that was more fat than meat, fried until crispy and placed between bread while still hot. The pork was sliced thin, fried slowly until the fat rendered and edges crisped, creating something between bacon and fried fatback. The salt content was intense, providing essential sodium for bodies sweating through southern heat. Streak-O-Lean cost less than bacon because it contained more fat and less meat, making it affordable for families stretching every penny. The fried slices soaked into bread, creating a rich, salty sandwich that satisfied hunger completely. Workers carried these, knowing the fat and salt would sustain them through brutal labor. Children learned to love the crispy edges and soft centers that made this humble cut taste like real sustenance. Fried egg sandwiches provided cheap protein that could be prepared in minutes when nothing else was available. Families fried eggs in whatever fat the kitchen held, usually bacon grease or lard, then placed them between bread while the yolk was still runny. The yolk became the sauce, soaking into bread and creating richness without additional ingredients. Eggs cost almost nothing when families kept backyard chickens, making this lunch essentially free. Workers carried these to jobs, eating them cold when no other option existed. Children learned to fry their own eggs young, taking responsibility for their own meals. The simplicity was the genius because eggs provided complete protein, requiring minimal skill or time. Fried egg sandwiches represented the baseline of survival, the lunch made when everything else had run out. Leftover rice balls transformed yesterday's dinner into today's portable lunch. Families shaped cold rice into firm balls, sometimes adding bits of meat or vegetables, then wrapped them in cloth for transport. The rice held together when properly packed, creating a self-contained meal requiring no bread or utensils. In Gullah communities along the Carolina coast, rice was the staple grain at every meal. Leftover rice was never wasted because it could always become tomorrow's lunch. Workers carried rice balls in pockets or pails, eating them by hand during breaks. Children found them easier to manage than sandwiches, the compact shape fitting small hands. The technique came from African foodways where rice balls had sustained travelers for generations. This lunch connected Black Americans to ancestral wisdom about stretching grain. Cold collared sandwiches packed leftover greens between bread for lunches that provided vitamins and fiber. Families cooked large batches of collards with smoked meat, then saved portions for next day's meals. The greens were squeezed to remove excess liquid, seasoned with hot sauce or vinegar, and spread between bread slices. The flavor was earthy and slightly bitter, the potlikker having concentrated overnight. Workers carried these knowing the greens provided nutrition that bread alone could never offer. Children ate them without complaint because collards were familiar. The taste of Sunday dinner transformed into Monday lunch. The sandwiches traveled well because greens stayed flavorful cold. This lunch represented practical genius of stretching one meal into two, ensuring that labor of cooking collards fed families multiple times. Sugar sandwiches were poverty meals requiring nothing more than bread, butter, or margarine, and white sugar sprinkled generously on top. Families made these when cupboards held almost nothing else, the sweetness providing quick calories and the illusion of something special. Children loved them because sugar felt like a treat even when it was actually desperation. The butter held sugar in place, preventing it from spilling when the sandwich was bitten. Workers sometimes packed these when other options had disappeared, knowing sugar would provide energy even without real nutrition. The practice represented the lowest point of scarcity, the lunch that existed when everything else was gone. Yet families ate them without shame because survival required using whatever was available. Mayonnaise sandwiches existed as pure survival food, nothing but bread and mayo when the refrigerator held nothing else. Families spread mayonnaise thick to create the feeling of richness, the fat providing calories even when it provided little else. The taste was simple and creamy, the texture soft throughout. Children ate these during the hardest times, learning to appreciate whatever their parents could provide. The sandwiches cost almost nothing because mayonnaise lasted for weeks and bread was always cheapest. Workers packed these when paychecks hadn't arrived and pantries were bare. The shame some felt later transformed into understanding that their parents had done whatever survival required. This lunch represented the bottom of the barrel, yet also represented love and determination to feed children something. Fried okra sandwiches turned garden vegetables into portable lunches during summer months when okra grew faster than families could eat it fresh. The okra was sliced, dredged in cornmeal, and fried until crispy, then piled between bread while still warm. The texture was crunchy outside and slightly soft inside, the cornmeal coating providing satisfying crunch. Families grew okra because it thrived in southern heat and produced abundantly with minimal care. The sandwiches traveled reasonably well, though okra lost some crispness by lunchtime. Children helped harvest okra from gardens, learning the connection between growing food and eating it. Workers carried these during harvest season when okra appeared at every meal. Fried okra sandwiches proved that vegetable lunches could satisfy as completely as meat. Ham bone soup with bread provided filling lunches made from bones that had already flavored multiple meals. Families simmered ham bones with whatever vegetables were available, creating broth rich with smoky pork flavor. The soup was packed in jars alongside bread that could be dipped or crumbled into the liquid. Workers carried these, knowing the broth would warm them on cold days and fill them when nothing else was available. The bones had already seasoned greens, beans, or other dishes before becoming soup, representing the final extraction of value from a single piece of meat. Children learned that bones weren't waste but resources to be used completely. The practice required foresight, saving bones, and understanding that tomorrow's lunch depended on today's planning. Butter and pepper sandwiches existed when families had almost nothing but still needed to pack lunches. Bread was spread with whatever butter or margarine was available, then sprinkled generously with black pepper for flavor. The pepper added bite that made plain buttered bread seem like something more intentional. Families made these during lean weeks when meat and vegetables had run out, but bread and seasonings remained. The fat from butter provided essential calories, while pepper created the illusion of seasoning. Children ate them without realizing how close to empty the pantry had become. Workers packed these knowing they weren't much, but were better than nothing. The sandwiches represented creative desperation, using the simplest seasonings to transform scarcity into something eaten with modest dignity. Vienna sausage sandwiches used cheap canned sausages that required no refrigeration and lasted for months in pantries. Families split the small sausages lengthwise and arranged them on bread, sometimes adding mustard or hot sauce for flavor. The sausages were soft and salty, their processed taste familiar to children who grew up eating them regularly. Vienna sausages cost only pennies per can and provided protein when fresh meat was far beyond the budget. Workers carried these knowing they would remain safe through hot afternoons. The cans opened easily without tools, making them convenient for packed lunches. Children often ate them straight from the can as snacks, the salty softness satisfying. Vienna sausage sandwiches represented industrial-age survival food, canned protein keeping families fed when nothing fresh was available.
When life hands you a cow but almost nothing else, you cook the cow's brains. Fried cow brains, or calf's brains, if you want to sound a bit more gourmet, was a Dust Bowl specialty not because people wanted to eat it, but because they had to. They were not fastidious in the past. When you had to fight for your life, you ate everything that was on the animal. Now I know that fried cow brains may sound like something that shouldn't even be considered food, let alone something that might be considered delicious. For this dish, brains were washed in water or milk, dredged in flour, and fried until brown and crispy. Consider them as the first-generation chicken nuggets, if chicken nuggets had a soft core and came with a helping of angst. The flavor? It was mild, almost buttery, and that was the reason why nobody fled from the dish when somebody served it. Cow brains fried were dense in nutrients, especially protein, and thus a good meal during famine. While nowadays people might shudder at the thought of consuming brains, in the past, it was simply Tuesday's supper. And hey, if you put some gravy on top, it might just seem like you're eating gourmet food. Smoked turkey wing soup carried the deep, savory heart of Southern kitchens and was a common midday meal for hardworking families who needed something filling yet affordable. The wings were first seared in a cast-iron pot until their skin turned golden and released a smoky aroma that filled the house with comfort. Root vegetables like carrots, onions, and celery were added along with garlic and bay leaves to build a broth that simmered for hours and grew richer as the day passed. The turkey meat would slowly fall from the bone, creating a texture that felt luxurious without requiring expensive cuts of meat. Grandparents remembered how this soup stretched a few wings into enough servings to feed an entire household, and every bowl tasted like patience and care. Leftover broth was often saved for the next day to cook rice or greens, proving nothing went to waste in a frugal kitchen. The memory of its gentle smoke and earthy sweetness lingers even when the recipe has faded from daily tables. Okra and tomato stew with rice was the dependable pot of comfort simmering on many stovetops when the noon bell rang. Fresh okra pods thickened the stew naturally, while ripe tomatoes brought bright acidity that balanced the earthiness of onions, garlic, and bell pepper. A splash of homemade stock or even plain water was enough to create a rich broth once the vegetables released their juices. Served over a mound of steamed white rice, this dish carried the flavors of the Gullah Geechee coast into urban kitchens across the country. The gentle heat of cayenne or a pinch of smoked paprika added depth without overpowering the vegetables. Families loved it because it could feed many mouths from a single pot, staying warm for hours and tasting even better as the day went on. In the 1970s, it was common to see neighbors ladle generous helpings into bowls for visiting friends or for anyone who had come to lend a hand with household chores. If you've ever walked the streets of downtown New York, I'm sure you're familiar with the infamous pastrami on rye. If your grandma's from the Big Apple, chances are her recipe is highly regarded. This sandwich became a staple in Jewish delis in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, thanks to Eastern European immigrants. This one just featured an old-fashioned slice of pastrami on rye bread and a dollop of mustard. Grandma knew that when it came to sandwiches, sometimes less is more, and pastrami on rye is the perfect example of that. But hey, don't forget no pastrami on rye is complete without a pickle on the side. The tartness of a dill pickle or the sweetness of a bread and butter pickle is the perfect contrast to the savory pastrami. Okra and corn succotash captured the full brightness of summer gardens and turned it into a dish that could be enjoyed year-round. Fresh okra pods were sliced thin, their natural thickening qualities creating a silky texture as they simmered with sweet corn kernels and diced peppers. A knob of butter and a splash of homemade vegetable stock enriched the mixture, while chopped onions and a pinch of smoked paprika added depth. For families who kept backyard gardens or tended plots in community spaces, this lunch represented the reward of their hard work and the cooperative spirit of neighbors who traded vegetables freely. Grandparents would recall how the aroma of simmering succotash drifted through open windows, a signal that it was time to pause the day's chores and gather around the table. Served with cornbread or spooned over rice, the dish satisfied hunger without the need for expensive meat, proving that vibrant flavor could come entirely from the soil and the careful hands that cultivated it. Cornbread-crusted catfish fillets carried the essence of Friday fish fries straight into the lunch hour with a crunch that everyone in the neighborhood could hear. Fresh catfish fillets were seasoned with salt, black pepper, and a dusting of cayenne before being dredged in finely ground cornbread crumbs instead of plain cornmeal, which gave them a thicker, sweeter crust. The fillets were fried in cast-iron skillets until the coating turned a warm golden color and the inside stayed moist and flaky. Served between slices of soft white bread or alongside a scoop of slaw, these catfish pieces were as common at church gatherings as they were at family reunions. They were a reminder of the rivers and bayous that had long supplied African-American tables with fresh fish and a taste of home. In the 1970s, the aroma of frying catfish meant neighbors would drop by unannounced, drawn by the smell alone, ready to share stories and a plate without needing an invitation first. Dandelion salad might sound like a fairy tale-like name for an incredibly frugal but delicious meal. By now, you might have noticed the scavenger vibe in terms of ingredients of the dishes so far. People making anything out of whatever they had on hand. Economic downturns often feature lifestyle changes, and the Great Depression was no other, sending people on a scramble to find and eat anything. Dandelion salad took scramble seriously as the meal involved finding and foraging dandelions. You would cut out all the roots, flowers, and waste to make the dressing for a very healthy salad. For people, especially those on a diet and a budget, this was a godsend. For a garnish, all people would usually put on it was lemon juice and olive oil, a dash of salt, and you were good to go at basically no cost. Stewed black-eyed peas with ham bone stood as a quiet but powerful example of frugality meeting flavor. A single smoked ham bone, saved from a previous meal, was enough to enrich a whole pot of peas with deep, smoky notes. The peas simmered slowly with chopped onions, celery, and a bay leaf until tender, their earthy taste blending perfectly with the broth. Cornbread on the side turned the dish into a complete lunch that filled stomachs and kept energy high through long afternoons of farm work or factory shifts. Grandparents spoke of how nothing was wasted and how even a leftover bone could nourish a large family when treated with patience. This humble meal carried the history of West African foodways and Southern resilience, proving that a dish born of necessity could be every bit as delicious as a costly feast. Each spoonful told a story of perseverance and community strength that still resonates for those who cherish these old kitchen traditions. Sweet potato and black-eyed pea patties turned ordinary pantry staples into a satisfying and protein-rich lunch that fit tight budgets. Mashed sweet potatoes brought natural sweetness and a gentle earthiness, while black-eyed peas added hearty texture and steady energy for the rest of the day. Cooks would mash the peas, fold them with finely chopped onion, a shake of paprika, and just enough flour to hold everything together before frying each patty until the edges crisped to a deep golden brown. They were often served with a spoonful of pepper vinegar or a drizzle of homemade hot sauce for a bright finish. These patties could be slipped into a soft roll for a sandwich or packed in foil to eat on their own during a midday break at work or after church. In the 1970s, kitchens across the South and Midwest, this dish stood as proof that frugality could still taste like a celebration and that simple vegetables could hold their own as the center of a meal. Potatoes had more use than just what was under all the layers. Once peeled, people would often fry the potato skins as a midday snack. Nothing would ever go to waste in homes back then, as you must have gathered by now. If they can make stuff out of sausage drippings and drain the fat from bacon to reuse, frying up some potato skins does not seem that out of the box at all. These fried skins were the perfect sidekick to potato pancakes, and the fact that the skins had a lot of health benefits made it all the more appealing. Things like this really helped to keep appetites in check, and that meant that the financial situation of the home would be calmer too. Collard green and smoked turkey sandwiches were the kind of meal that could keep you full through an afternoon shift and still taste like something made with care at home. Tender greens, slow-cooked with onion, and a touch of vinegar gave each bite a soft tang that balanced the rich smokiness of turkey left to simmer for hours. The sandwich bread was always fresh from a local bakery or a neighbor's oven, and many families would wrap these in wax paper for easy carrying to school or work. In the 1970s, these sandwiches traveled to church picnics, jazz festivals, and union lunch breaks, bringing the same comfort wherever they went. They were not just leftovers pressed together, but a reflection of community cooking where every ingredient stretched to feed more than one plate. People often added a swipe of mustard or homemade hot sauce for an extra kick, though the core of the sandwich needed nothing but the steady flavor of greens and turkey to feel complete. Country-style meatloaf patties brought the comfort of a Sunday dinner into the weekday noon hour. Instead of baking one large loaf, thrifty cooks shaped seasoned ground beef and pork into small patties that pan-fried quickly in cast iron. The sizzling patties were then topped with a simple tomato gravy made from garden tomatoes, onions, and a pinch of brown sugar to balance the tang. This approach saved time and stretched limited ingredients further, allowing families to enjoy the taste of meatloaf without waiting for a long oven bake or using too much fuel. Children often grabbed a warm patty between slices of bread for an easy sandwich, while adults savored them beside buttered greens or a scoop of mashed potatoes. The smell of tomato gravy bubbling on the stove filled homes with a warmth that lingered well beyond lunch. Even today, the memory of those savory patties and the way they brought everyone to the table lives on in family stories and faded recipe cards tucked inside old kitchen drawers. Forage mushrooms didn't always lining our burgers and topping our pizzas. For a majority of its history, it was really just something people ate when things were super bad. There was nothing to eat and people basically just had to forage for whatever they could. The most popular of this was the button mushroom, but they definitely tried to forage as much as they could. Now, despite this, mushrooms were still considered really low class. People had just begun to associate it with nothing but poverty and hard times. It wasn't until the middle and the later end of the 20th century that mushrooms started to become a classic topping you'd see on not just burgers and pizzas, but steaks, chicken dishes, sandwiches, and all kinds of soups and stews. Basically, it's a mushroom world, and we're just living in it now. A big part of this is how canned mushrooms became so accessible. Another reason is that an interest in European cuisine led to a massive boom in cream of soups and cream of mushroom soups. Share some of your favorite mushrooms with us right now in the comments. Smoked sausage and cabbage skillet brought big flavor out of humble ingredients, creating a lunch that filled the kitchen with the aroma of hickory and spice. Thick slices of smoked pork sausage sizzled in a heavy skillet before ribbons of cabbage were added to the pan, soaking up every drop of savory fat. A handful of onions and a splash of cider vinegar brightened the dish and balanced the richness of the meat. Served over buttered rice or eaten straight from the skillet with crusty bread, it was a quick meal that required little more than a knife and a cutting board. In the 1970s, it became a favorite for workers coming home on a short break or for families needing a warm meal before heading back to afternoon chores. The combination of smoky meat and tender cabbage created a flavor that felt bigger than its parts and reminded everyone how satisfying a one-pan lunch could be when cooked with care and a little imagination. Fried croaker sandwiches were a Tidewater tradition that brought the flavor of coastal waters straight to the lunch table. Whole croaker fish were cleaned, lightly seasoned with salt and black pepper, then dredged in cornmeal before meeting hot lard in a heavy skillet. The sizzling sound promised a crisp crust that contrasted perfectly with the tender, flaky flesh inside. Families along the Atlantic coast relied on this meal when larger fish were too costly or unavailable, and the mild taste of croaker made it a favorite among children and adults alike. Once cooked, the fish were placed between slices of soft white bread or cornmeal rolls, sometimes with a smear of homemade tartar sauce or a few leaves of garden lettuce. It was a sandwich that celebrated simplicity and resourcefulness, proving that a satisfying lunch could come straight from local waters with little more than a good cast net and a patient hand. Today, it is rarely seen outside of a few small communities that still honor the old ways of fishing and cooking. Chicken a la king and puff pastry was another little nugget of French culture and cuisine that served us pretty well. So the idea here this time was to stuff creamy chicken and mushrooms into one single pastry, and there would be lots of these individual pastries, each stuffed to the brim. By now, we're talking about somewhere along the 70s. America's always been a big fan of cream. There's really no denying that, but I would say that we've warmed up to mushrooms a lot more than we used to. I don't think they were not popular, but they weren't exactly a standout ingredient that would be making anyone's top 10 or top 5 either. Americans were changing their palates regarding mushrooms thanks to two things, though. One, they had built up a fondness for it thanks to how many Americans, especially ones living on the edges of urban hubs, relied on foraging wild mushrooms. Two, things like cream soups, such as cream of mushroom soups, were already making the pairing of cream and mushrooms popular. This take on puff pastry wasn't exactly a long shot, since the stage was pretty much mostly set. However, I think most people have opted for things like sandwiches and ordering takeout at lunch now, or just getting a coffee. Work cultures really changed, and having a full-fledged meal during your 15-minute break isn't the most appealing option to a lot of people nowadays. Peanut butter and sorghum syrup sandwiches gave children a sweet reward that parents could still afford when sugar prices were climbing. Sorghum syrup, dark and rich with a subtle caramel note, spread smoothly over fresh bread and mingled with creamy peanut butter for a sticky treat that clung to fingers and hearts alike. This sandwich was packed into lunch pails headed for school buses and factory floors, offering long-lasting energy with ingredients that stayed fresh without refrigeration. Sorghum had deep roots in southern farming, and in the 1970s it remained a pantry staple for many African American households that valued both tradition and thrift. The simple act of drizzling syrup over peanut butter turned a basic sandwich into something special, with each bite carrying a sweet depth far beyond plain jelly. Children traded halves with friends, and adults often sneaked a second sandwich for themselves, proof that the best lunches were not always the fanciest ones. Potato pancakes are one that we are very sad to have seen fade away from the arsenal of home chefs. Pancakes made with matzo or applesauce topped with garlic or fried onions made for such a mouth-watering meal. Low-income households back in those times were struggling to buy produce. Farmers' markets were uniformly unaffordable for middle-income households due to creeping inflation. People needed a vegetable that was cost-appropriate and easy to make in batches. Enter the potato pancake, which revolutionized the breakfast scene in a struggling time. As times improved, people slowly started going to more fancier and creative breakfasts, unfortunately leaving simpler dishes behind. Potato pancakes took a backseat in the face of changing food and economic trends, but anyone from the era will rave to you about the godsend these were. Field pea and rice pilaf turned a handful of pantry staples into a fragrant dish that could stand proudly on its own at the center of a midday table. Field peas were simmered until tender with garlic, bay leaf, and a touch of black pepper, then folded gently into long grain rice cooked in homemade stock. Chopped bell pepper and onion added color and sweetness, while a drizzle of olive oil gave the finished pilaf a light sheen. Families often made a large pot in the morning so it would be ready when children came home for lunch or when neighbors dropped by unannounced. The dish carried the legacy of West African rice traditions and proved that a meal did not need meat to feel hearty and complete. In the 1970s, it appeared at picnics, church gatherings, and everyday kitchens alike, earning its place as a beloved dish that tasted as good cold as it did warm. One pot, simple ingredients, lasting satisfaction.
Which of these survival lunches do you remember from your family's table? Drop your memories in the comments, hit like, and subscribe for more forgotten flavors from our ancestors' kitchens.